Could you feel that? Feel that everything is holy now? Notice that vibration in that field when we feel a sense of belonging, a sense of nourishment, a sense of harmony, a sense of peace. Isn't it a beautiful sense to feel? I even noticed as we were saying our opening prayer and our opening statement, how different it was when we said it together with the music. Could you feel that? All of a sudden, these words of power went to another place, landed in another place, and we all found a rhythm together. We all found a song together, and it's like it was lifted into another place and had another place to land. That sense of belonging, right? We all spoke together, almost like a song. So what is that experience? We're in our third week of our Adventures in Spirituality, and this week is on discovering God. What is that experience of discovering God? If you're here for the first time and you don't know what Adventures of Spirituality is, it is our 5 to 6 week spirit study that we do every fall. And we take a book and we dive into the chapters, and we have at-home study groups. And this year, for the first time, we have an online study group. So if you're joining us in cyberspace, or if you don't live here at Unity Village, you can still participate in this spiritual nourishment and get to know people at a deeper level and share and explore. So halfway through this, we are talking about the chapters in the book Handbook for the Spirit, and the chapters this week are all on discovering God. Discovering God. The song Holy Now is all about that. The song Holy Now is all about moving from that place where, when one might be a child or in whatever stage of growth and development, one might think that I experience God when I'm in church. And this is the time to be with God. This is the time to be spiritual. And I experience God through another person, through the priest, or through whoever the leader is. I experience God in this seat, in a sanctuary, in a holy place, because that place has been deemed holy and sacred activity happens there. And then the song goes into the evolution of consciousness as this man wakes up to find that maybe he had some disconnection from those old feelings. You know, maybe some of that stuff didn't make sense anymore to his spiritual practice. And maybe he had a moment of alienation from those feelings. And then there was an awakening. And that awakening is one in which every drop of water turned into holy water. So not only was there holy water that was blessed by a priest in a church, but in fact, something happened. A vision was transformed, and every time water was seen or touched, there was a reverence. And he got it, and he knew. Not only was the church building and all of these places where sacred activity happens all the time a sanctuary, but in fact, one could walk into anywhere, dare I even say a bar, and find a church. Truly, walk into anywhere and find the consciousness of a sacred activity and a sacred moment. That one could say, watch a game, maybe. Is there a game going on today? I got a heads up from my people. One could watch a game. In one of those experiences, one could have moments of glory, of seeing connections, of being and having a vibration and a field that reminds us of love, reminds us of life, reminds us of God, right? That any moment, in fact, there can be a ministry occurring. Because ministry doesn't happen within ministers and in churches. Ministry is an aspect of consciousness that is the divine birthright in each one of us, continually unfolding until we wake up to those moments of recognizing, divine appointment here. My gifts are called here. My life force is called here. I have discovered a holy moment here. Sound beautiful, right? In our chapter, there was a reading that alluded to this consciousness of everything is holy now. The reference is by Andrew Harvey, who is actually coming to Unity early next year for the Lyceum. But he's very known in the spiritual field. And he says this. He's quoting Rumi. And he says, "All the joys you experience," said Rumi, "are rays from the Son of God. When you taste a delicious peach, you taste the body of God. The joy you feel looking at the face of your friend, your lover, or a child in the street is actually the soul's rapture at the presence of the divine in the universe. The music you thrill to is actually one facet of the great voice of the Creator. When you understand this, you understand that the divine is not far away from you, but is actually dancing in the core of your life at every moment." He goes on to say, to develop this understanding further, to create a deep personal relationship with God, we must take seriously the testimony of all the great mystics. They speak of this direct connection to the divine in ways that are astonishingly similar. Their testimony to the glory and the passion and the wildness and sometimes the fierce suffering of this relationship is neither exaggeration nor poetry. They are simply explaining what all of us could live if we allowed the overwhelming love of God to come to us. Maybe some of you don't have the book yet, and maybe now you're thinking, maybe I will pick up that book. The beauty of this book is that we get to see and experience and feel this evolution of God consciousness, the expansion of God consciousness through a variety of different authors. In the back of this book, you find a write-up on each person and the diversity of people that we have here and where they came from in their spiritual path, so that we can find ourselves, right? Because isn't that one of the things that it's about? It's finding ourselves in these writings. Finding ourselves not because it's lost, but because we sometimes have to give ourselves permission to be that important. We sometimes have to give ourselves permission to be relevant. Permission to consider ourselves maybe not so far away from all of these people that explain their experience of the divine. But before we feel this connection that we heard about in that song, that we just read about in that passage, that you may feel right here in this sanctuary right now, or you may not. Before you feel it, and I dare say even after you feel it, we go into other spaces in our minds, into other spaces in our consciousness, and into other spaces in our experience, which don't reflect belonging, do they? They don't reflect joy. They don't reflect feeling connected. They don't reflect feeling a personal, internal, and external connection with the divine. We go to other places. Before we feel awake, clear, and connected, we feel an urge. Sometimes that urge comes in the form of the feeling of torture, of absolute separation, of a hole in your heart or a hole in your being, or a darkness, a disconnection. It's hard to say that a hole or a darkness or a disconnection could be beautiful. But one of the beauties is that it's something that is shared in the human condition. Now, don't start worrying if you've never felt it. Good for you. But if you have you given yourself permission to call that normal? If you have felt a separation, a longing, an urge, an incompleteness, that somewhere something's wrong, something's missing, something's lacking, can we give ourselves permission not to call that wrong? And in fact, to turn it around and say, wow, even on a deeper level, I could get from this a greater sense of belonging. A sense of belonging because I belong not only to the fullness of my spirit, but I belong to humanity. And I am one of those exploring the path of unfolding my divinity. This urge is talked about by spiritual authors left and right. It is throughout the sacred scripture. It is throughout almost every experience we see or we hear about where someone feels like they touched the core of their being, like they experienced the divine. Yet in the human condition, we act like it's a problem. We push it away, we get scared of it, we call it bad. I don't think that necessarily this concept of having that urge or having that feeling of a lack of wholeness is bad at all. What can feel bad is not being awake to it, not being aware. Because when we're not awake and aware, we push something away, we ignore it, right? We have times of sleep. And if we don't ignore it, then we do the opposite and we actually purposely press it away, consciously resist it. And we know what happens when we consciously resist something, right? It grows, it gets louder, right? What happens when you ignore something? If you ignore a body part that is speaking to you, what happens? It gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse. If you ignore a baby crying, what happens? Well, sometimes if you do it long enough, then they call that a technique, right? But when we ignore it, we fall asleep and we cut ourselves short from having a divine experience, from having an experience of connection that comes through emerging through the other side of the portal of loneliness, the other side of the portal of the darkness, the other side of the portal of that void or that hole or that urge. I want to read to you a little from our reading this week about the urge. I don't think it's on this page. Well, it was good wherever it was. We'll see if we can find it later. But the urge is that place within our being that we know something's missing. There it is, the homesickness. Isn't that a good word for it? Has anyone ever felt homesickness? And then if you can relate that to your experience as a spirit on the path of awakening, I mean, it's almost like when you just say that word homesickness, you can feel yourself, even if you're here with people in this sanctuary, even if you're with people in your living room, wherever you are, right? You can feel when you hear that word homesickness, it almost can bring up that feeling of when one noticed they're in a separate body and separate skin and somewhat alone. Can you feel that? Stephen Levine says this in his writing. There is in all our strivings a profound homesickness for God. When we touch another, we touch God. When we look at a flower, its radiance, its fragrance, its stillness is another moment's experience of something deeper within. That feeling of connection, that paradox between feeling and seeing it all over and having this craving, this urge, this homesickness is a creative field. It's a creative field of activity that urges us to keep going, urges us to have courage, urges us to look into the depths of our soul and to look beyond what the appearance of every moment is and to find our belonging, and not just to find it, but to create it. So can we as spiritual practitioners in every experience not resist them but say, I belong here. I belong in this moment. I belong on this planet. I belong with these mystics. I belong with any aspect of humanity or divinity. And in that belonging, I'm not avoiding. Because one of the tricky parts of being human is that we do have these ways that we can fall asleep. We can fall asleep and put in that urge, in that hole that only spirit can fill, that only the courageous spiritual path can fill. Only our solo exploration as a traveler in this light body can fill. We can instead try to fall asleep by filling it with work, filling it with relationship, filling it with substance, filling it with thrills or activity, filling it with change, filling it with drama. We can fill it with all sorts of things so that we can fall asleep for a little while. But the truth is, once we feel that urge, we are never asleep again. We are just pretending. Once we feel that urge, we never sleep again. We are just pretending. So why not wake up? Myrtle Fillmore, Unity's co-founder, said this about people that overindulge in substance. She said that, and it's brilliant, she said, it stems from a deep, deep spirituality. Someone that is so deeply spiritual. Someone that has such power and such connection, that they're muting it, lessening it. What a different way to look at that, right? What a different way to look at it if I feel like I have taken my life to a place where it's going crazy, or I feel like there's an intensity of which I'm avoiding something, right? So it tricks the mind, right? Any situation, any circumstance that we could think, oh, this looks like a mess. What if we were to flip it and to say, ooh, there's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of depth there. And in that depth, if we can see it in a moment, so is there too a lot of potential. And that's scary, is it not? To tap into that light and to tap into that potential and to say, what would I be if I'm not muting all of this intuition? What would I be if I'm not muting all of this life with my work or with my family or with my drama, whatever it is? What would I be if I were to show up as peaceful, centered, grounded, inspired for myself and for my planet over and over? There's some people who've done it, right? The master teacher, Martin Luther King. You can look at saints and sages throughout the ages. But that master teacher, Jesus the Christ, demonstrated that the Christ is a consciousness that can fill and that can carry a human form throughout a lifetime in a divine way, without resisting its calling to the degree that we fall asleep. Now, this could sound like the bad news. What's happened to most of the people that have woken up to their calling? What's happened to most of the people who have not muted their fire? What's happened to most of the people that have discovered God and said yes? That's right. The crucifixion, or whatever way it takes form in life, right? Maybe human body's taken out, right? Okay, you're done here, whatever it is. A deep spiritual life, we have learned in this human condition, comes with great cost. We have been born into a system where we're taught that if we live our brightest light, we are taught that there is immense difficulty. True or not true? I guess you'd have to ask the one who went through it, right? In any moment, you'd have to ask the one who went through it and lived through it and who paid attention to every moment, whether or not what everyone else considered to be a crucifixion, whether or not what everyone else considered to be, even getting the calling to speak for God, to cross the sea, to part the water. for God, the grand overall design of life. You'd have to ask the one who experienced the experience whether or not, in fact, it was a crucifixion, whether or not, in fact, it was a bad thing. So the question is, in this lifetime, will we ask the one? And who is the one but ourselves? Who is the one but ourselves? When we begin to take it on, when we begin to say that I will explore the fulfillment of this urge, not calling it wrong, but knowing that it was born in me for a great purpose, we give our lives up to a higher consciousness, and not in a way that it's separate from self at all, right? Not in a way that's separate, but in fact a way that's fully integrated, that is a fully integrated self, that is all of life. Andrew Harvey speaks about these waking moments and coming out of this trance when he talks about the great tool. Guess in our minds for a second what one of the great tools is. He says the advantage of practicing simple meditation day in and day out, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes before you go to bed, is that you gradually establish a gap between your essential divine nature, which is spacious, calm, joyous, blissful, full of tenderness towards all of life, and the biographical self, which is caught in various karmic nightmares. Slowly, the gap between the essential you and the biographical you becomes easier to see. As this happens, you can exercise restraint and detachment and gradually free your biological self from the various obsessions that keep it fearful and blind. Then you can become more and more in harmony with your own richest possibilities. Amen. So I leave you with this good news, and it is good news. There are no quick fixes. They go on to say, there is no quick fix, no way to the relationship with God. But the time-honored ways of approaching God never fail if they are pursued with real sincerity. I'm rearranging it a bit to go back to this piece where he quotes Ramakrishna, who said, people are always coming to me and saying, why can't I see God? Why can't I feel God? Why can't I taste God? And I always say to them, if you put into your spiritual life as much energy as you put into getting ahead in the office or in committing adultery or in perfecting your lawn, then you'd have the results. They may not come quickly, but they will come if you persist patiently. Wow. And here's the best part of that good news, if you are still hanging on for it. You discover that as you take one step towards the divine in open-heartedness, the divine will take 1,000 steps toward you. Namaste.